I mean, that's that's a fucking Terminator. It's been solved, right? Like all I have to do is duct tape a gun to that.
All you have to do is duct tape a gun to that. You heard it here first. Welcome back to another Zengineering podcast. I'm Adam.
Brian.
So what's up? What's up, man?
Hey, buddy.
So this week I think we kind of talked about it last week, right? That we're gonna use this episode to talk about next season. This is episode 22.
22
episode. Do you want to play your celebratory sound?
Playing. Oh no, the video. Oh, I turned the sound off. What happened?
No, that wasn't good. There it is.
Episode 22.
Which we sort of arbitrarily decided is going to be
it's not
a
arbitrary.
rollover on a, quote, season.
It's not arbitrary at all. In honor of our collective favorite show, Star Trek: The Next Generation, we want to do 22 episodes because they did 22 episodes per season, which we then realized was standard for TV, and then we realized that Star Trek didn't actually do 22 episodes their first season, but doesn't matter. That was the goal, and we're there, and we're celebrating season 22.
Either way, it roughly represents about a year of work, and we thought it was a good point to reevaluate what we're doing and can try to continue to improve. Because that's part of the, if you want to go back and listen to our Uncomfy Topics episode for a nice little introduction on our effort to use this podcast as a mechanism for growth.
That episode was pivotal.
Personal growth. So this episode, we're going to start out with a little quick intro for the people that are listening via our Patreon page.
Yeah, so we've moved our website over to Patreon. It's a website that kind of allows businesses to get themselves started by raising small amounts of money. So if you're a listener of Zengineering, if you like it, if you want to support it, or you just enjoy it and you want to toss us $1 a month, we've set this up so each episode we launch in season 2, you can donate like $1 per episode or $5 per episode. It's a really cool microfinancing system, kind of like websites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, sites that people might be familiar with. And so we were checking it out. We've been supporting some other artists on it, and it seemed like a cool platform, not only to check out, we wanted to do an episode on it, and then we were like, hey, maybe we should just set up an account here and really get to know it. So we're running the blog through it now. We're shooting to cover our production costs, which are pretty moderate. I think we calculated them at $50 per episode.
Yeah, it's not a crazy amount.
And we want to up season 2. We're stoked.
Part of it is we want to use something like Patreon as a hub for the people that really care about everything that we're talking about and that are really involved in the community, so we can keep talking to them and keep our own sort of stoke going, right? Because we're not making a living off of this, so
no, this is something fun.
Keep doing it because it's cool.
Yeah, we want to grow it. We've got a really cool following with some close friends, a lot of people that I really respect, and I'm really, really humbled that they listen to our podcast every week. And so I want to make it available to some other people. So we're going to take some of this money. We've already up to $23, I think, which is pretty cool because we haven't really done anything with this yet. But we're going to take some of this money and reinvest it into the platform, into other artists to support them. And we're going to take the other pieces and pay for some of our overhead for this and kind of pump some into marketing so we can grow this and get a real following and a community that can participate in Zengineering. And
there's a couple different levels that you can sign up at. I think the basic one is just $1 per episode. That's basically like you'll get blog posts and updates that we don't put out through other channels. And I think at the $5 level, you're right, I should have pulled this site up. At the $5 level, you get at the least a yearly T-shirt, maybe some surprise T-shirts throughout.
Totally. Yeah, all we've got is $1 and $5. I don't know what you call them, rewards, I think, on here. For us, they're just supporting donations. And yeah, we're going to start making some cool shirts. So I assume if you're pledging $5 to us that you know us at the moment. So probably. Shoot me an email and chat with me about T-shirts. Maybe you have a T-shirt idea. We'll put it up on our site.
So that's the short version. If you're here on Patreon and you looked at that file and you said, why is this an hour long? You're done already. You can go. You know everything you need to know about Patreon. From here, we're going to do a standard if you want to get a taste. If you're new here, and you get a taste for what, our episodes are like, we're going to do a podcast where we talk about some of the underlying stuff that makes Patreon work and that makes it a like a living thing, like the idea of crowdfunding and microfinancing and micropayments and that kind of stuff.
The redistribution of wealth to the common man.
Woo!
That's where I want to go with it. That's where I hope everyone who runs these businesses wants to go with it.
Yeah. Economics, communism and shit.
Damn right. Socialism, communism, I don't know.
Some Marx up in this bitch.
These are your words.
Stuff like Patreon. So do you want to step a little further back from the quick and dirty intro that we just did and talk about the idea of Patreon or similar sites?
Let's talk
crowdfunding in general.
Yeah, let's talk about maybe Kickstarter. That's probably the most popular.
I was going to say, when's the first time that you were aware of crowdfunding, right? It was probably Kickstarter.
Kickstarter, maybe Indiegogo. I think that's probably just as popular. There's sites that they're really interesting. I mean, I don't know what their grand vision was when they started it, but the idea was somebody who wants to do something that costs money, if it's creative pursuit, say it's an art project, if it's, go to college, if it's start a small business, sell a product, they go on a website like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and they post about it. They've gotten pretty complex now. You do a real pitch for a business on these sites, but you launch your product, you talk about how you've done development with it, you talk about the business objectives, or you talk about the project that you're working on, and then you have a fundraising goal, and you say, hey, I want to paint this amazing mural in downtown San Diego. I've already got the permits. Here's the sketches I'm going to do. Everything's approved. I need $10,000 in supplies. Who wants to support? And then people who go on those sites can see. Now they can see tens of thousands of projects that are going on, and you can donate any amount of money. And so you can donate $1 to help, and then the artist needs 10,000 people to do it. Or you can donate $100, and then they need 100 people. And it's just this really cool platform for kind of democratizing doing things that cost money, which has never really existed before.
Right. And so my question as you were running through that was like, how was it before crowdfunding, right? Like you in order to, like a TV broadcast or something is not just something that a person could do. It's because it costs a lot of money to make the thing before it can even go out over the airwaves, right? Like
tons.
And that's true for any product, right? So
everything.
You can't just make a mural. Like you need paint, so it's not as expensive, but somebody's got to pay for that, right? So it's usually like the rec center that the mural's on the side of, or like the neighborhood association. Like there are other intermediates that would control getting the money to make this thing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, previously, there's a good this mural on a rec center is an interesting example, right? Because previously it was kind of democratized, right? Like the city would pay for it, or the city council, or like a nonprofit in town would pay for it. But now what we're doing is projects that go on websites like this have been reduced to the most granular level of potential funding. It's the individuals in the community. It's the individuals on the internet who want to support something.
Well, it's the difference between actual democratization and it being a product of democracy, like which is something that I don't want to dive into right now because it's a whole separate episode. But like, there's a difference and a conflation between the two. Like, democracy is our form of government. It is largely democratized, but it doesn't. So like the fact that your local government, which were officials that you elected through democracy, were the ones that would, put together that the mural is going to go up and put the money into it, doesn't necessarily, like, that is democratization more so than you having absolutely no say in what mural goes up. But it's not full on like, here's my dollar, put it directly toward the mural. So in a sense, this democratizes the market force part of like, if you don't want that mural, don't put up money for it and it won't get money. But the cool thing with Kickstarter is they started finding that people are like super happy to fund things. Like just, oh yeah, that is a good idea. And I think the other thing you need to talk about with these sites though is rewards.
Yeah, so it's
not necessarily just to make the thing exist always. Particularly Kickstarter and Indiegogo are about the reward.
Yeah, that's the part that's neat. It basically has become, I think of it more now as like a business launch platform, but I think that's just because I don't explore more of the artistic projects that are on there, which I should, because I personally am a big user of Kickstarter. I know you are too. I think I've participated in maybe 20 projects.
I've
probably
300
bought
projects, I think.
300. I think I've probably bought a handful of things, but I've kicked in like $1 or $5 to a bunch of projects that I just thought were really neat and I wanted to follow. But what it's become is a platform to launch a business or to launch a product or a project. And what you get is you get rewards from it. So say I'm launching a smartwatch. That's been a really popular product on there. There've been a couple. I'm staring at one that you have attached to your mic boom at the moment. But if you launch that on there, the reward levels can be the product. So it's really neat from a business perspective because you get to go to market with your product before you raise the capital to actually manufacture your product.
Raise the capital. That's the interesting. So the place where it's this disruption that's in the get stuff space, the reward space, and what we should go into later is how Patreon is a little different. But like, if you go back to the episode where we're talking about developing pharmaceuticals and the EpiPencil and stuff, there's this overhead for developing a product. So if you have this idea for an invention that you think people would like and they would pay for, before Kickstarter, the model was you had to go find some investor, somebody with big money or something that would put up enough money that you could make prototypes and refine the design and then get the thing, done in such a way that it could be mass produced. And then you had to just get it on the market. And if people don't buy it, all that money is just lost. And Kickstarter, if you say, well, for the reward, if you give us $70, which is what the thing would probably cost in a store, we'll just send you one of these products once this whole development process is finished. And here's what we think the product will be. Then you can actually raise all this money up front just from the people that would end up giving you money to have the thing anyway. And so it cuts out this intermediate step of like, there's tons of ideas that flounder on Kickstarter. And that's just an example of like, well, the market didn't bear out,
right?
But you didn't have to lose $3 million in investment before you did that.
It's neat. It's something that big companies do anyway. They do market research, right? They build prototypes. They go to cities and test them and see the responses. But small companies have never really been able to afford to do that properly or at large scale. And now you get the global community of the internet to look at these products, look at these things that you want to do, these art projects. And not only do people get to support them because they want one, but they get to support stuff because they care, which is really cool. And that's what's neat about driving down the investment amount, but upping the number of people who get to participate. And so $1 goes a long way when 100,000 people are each giving $1.
Well, and so it goes to that thing we were talking about again in the EpiPen thing, right? It's like on the other side of we like this and we want it to exist, here's some money, is we don't like this and we don't want it to exist. Which
so
is
give me your $1.
It's like what we were talking about near the end of that episode, where it's this feedback situation of they announce that the price of the drug is going up. And we've sort of closed that loop because people, before you even have to hit them in the wallet, can turn around and say, we're not going to pay that. And like within 3 days, they back away and go, oh, you're right. Okay. Like it's part of even closing that loop because totally. Like you could just put a thing on Kickstarter that says, we have the science to say that this drug might do this thing. And if you agree, here's how much money we need to test it out and FDA approved, blah, 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 blah. But then if you've crowdfunded that, you can't then come back and go, we need to charge this much for it so we can cover our, like.
It's like open.
It's open, right. It's
public.
It's a public thing where you're not like, it's not this thing of, oh, well, it costs this much. And everyone's like, yeah, well, that's what you're reporting.
Well, that's one of the really neat pieces of Kickstarter. And I don't think this is actually a requirement. Or I'm almost certain it's not a requirement of the site, but I think the conceptually, this crowdsourcing came from open source software. And another different topic, but the idea of lots of people participating to make something that really all they needed to contribute was their time. Software is an interesting thing to manufacture because it kind of just takes time investment. It doesn't really take a lot of money, but and so this adaptation, when Kickstarter coming on board, you see a lot of products where they're open sourced. So you see a lot of electronics projects where they're so open about what they're doing. They're sharing who they're manufacturing with. They're taking videos in the manufacturing plants. They're sending out emails about the process for developing a product. They're sharing the electrical schematics. They're sharing the software. They're making things hackable. And so it's this really, really exciting space where we're coming into a time period now where real products, real physical items are open sourced now. I can buy them. I can 3D print parts of my watch. I can order a CPU that's manufactured online from a virtual CPU manufacturer. Like, you can get this really interesting stuff it's removing these barriers that make things more expensive. It's removing the need for traditional marketing dollars and traditional middlemen and companies
right. So middlemen, right, is the thing that we're constantly talking about with media and stuff, right? Like, the idea of media creation has been diffused to the people because you don't need a studio anymore just to do what we're doing, like right now. It's the same with the crowdsourcing stuff. And the place where I think that's cool is because when the stuff is open and there's only a certain amount, like the idea of copyright or patents, which we've talked about before, is there's value for the market in giving you a period of time during which you can profit from having come up with an idea. And so something like Kickstarter, like, kicks the profit or the money that you can make from that idea. Because, like, if you put up we need $100,000 to build out these prototypes to figure out, mass manufacturing, and then we can have this thing out for you to buy. And you not accidentally, but like because people dig the idea so much, you raise $5 million, a certain amount of that's going to go into fulfillment, but then a certain amount is just extra money you're getting because the idea was great, right? And so you made that money up front, and now you don't have this impetus after the fact to control delivery and control production with this like proprietary system in order to make that money, right? Like, the idea of I need to have this patented so no one else can reproduce it because that's how I'm going to make money is not as important. And so I think when it sort of flips that dynamic because it drives innovation if you are very open about the process of making this thing in such a way that if somebody watched your YouTube videos and took notes, they could literally reproduce it one for one just by following that you explained how everything works. Then if you want to persist as a brand, like the company Peak Designs that makes camera gear has done really well at this. Like, they continue to make their old products if you want to buy it, but they're also pretty open about the components of those products, and they just keep making new, cooler products. And so we keep persisting with the brand because it's like, oh, a cool new thing that I didn't think of. It's not because, oh, it's the only place I can get that old thing that I still need and want, and they're going to sue me if I try to make it myself out of duct tape.
It's a very exciting shift in products and economics for buying and selling goods in the world. It's taking it hasn't done this yet.
Just take a second, like, and think about what you just said. Like, it's one of those things where people are like, oh yeah, I guess you could crowdfund things. Like, I don't know that anyone has their head around the gravity of, like, you just explained that economic shifts. It's like, it's this sea change in how businesses work,
it's
and
huge.
How money works, and how markets work. It's the kind of stuff where the people that weren't prepared go, oh shit, what just happened?
Holy shit, what just happened? That is totally. Thank you for drawing attention to that. That is what's happening here. And it's been around now for a couple years, and I've been aware of it, so I've lost that enthusiasm, but I had that enthusiasm when this started. It's fucking incredible. And
my enthusiasm comes from the other places that it starts to show up, right? Like, we were just talking about law earlier, and then before we started this, and then it was like, oh, we need to talk about that on the podcast. We were talking about like professional services. Like, how does this diffuse to things like professional services, right? And this is like, I think the current example that everyone is the most aware of where it's like, holy shit, what just happened, is something like Uber, where like literally taxi cab companies now are having fights because they don't want Uber to exist. And Uber's just like, sorry, bros, Like
Well, it's the same. It's sort in an interesting, in like an economic sense, it's a similar thing happening. They have built a software system now that in real time judges prices, and so there's market demand. What will people pay to have a car pick them up? It's no longer $8, and over time, a business like develops around this and solidifies its place in the market. Comments like that are no longer relevant in the future of business, and and I don't want to judge previous generations because they've built this amazing world, this amazing foundation that we can grow in. But you shouldn't run a business just for maximizing profits anymore. You hear that in every single business school class. It's like the first thing the teacher says. Your job is to maximize profits for your shareholders. That's fucking bullshit, and everyone gets that. You want to build businesses to make the world better, to make people's lives easier, to offer a service, to pay salaries for people, to make a profit, to generate some amount, but the varying amount of what's reasonable is changing now. And so people are more aware, businesses are more capable. It's easier than ever to start a business. And so you no longer need the same level of motivation to become a multi-billionaire and have 10 yachts. That doesn't need to be the motivation for people to want to start their own businesses anymore. And so we now get to adjust people's expectations, and we get to adjust businesses' expectations. And this is something that's just starting. I'm getting ahead of where we are as a society quite yet, but it's where we're headed.
Yeah, well, and this is
fucking awesome.
But this is where I think it gets to that place where, you know, kind of this engineering of it, right? Which is what is that extrapolation, right? Like, and I don't mean that place like everybody's connected, but it's more like what that, like, the reason I stopped you to point out, like, do you see how big a shift this is because I feel like this is what we keep talking about. That's the thing that people don't see, right? Like the reason that people look at Uber, like the reason that the taxi cab companies are looking at Uber and they're going, no, it has to go back to the way it was before, is because they just never conceived of another way that it could be. And then this medium that allowed this communication, like when the internet democratized a certain form of communication, the fact of like what a taxi company offered is, if you just break it down, what a taxi company used to have was a garage where they maintained cars and a switchboard where a bunch of people answered phones, and then they hung up the phone, and then they got on a radio, and they used the radio to talk to their entire fleet and say, hey, is anybody near this location? And somebody would go, I am. And then they would say, okay, go over here and pick this guy up. And in exchange for that little relay of data, they were making an incredible amount of money for what that is worth in an economy of our communication. And so Uber replaced that switchboard system, and everybody went, no, we used to make so much money.
Right. Yeah. And
but
people
the world at large went, yeah, but for talking to people. And so, sorry, you don't get that anymore.
Yeah, you can get into sort of an economic debate too, because looking at the actual finances of this is probably tough. They could argue that, well, Uber isn't sustainable because it has so much investment money, yada yada yada. But the general trend here is the market has shifted, and what we're willing to pay for things is different now. And so that business is antiquated. It's going to go out of business, traditional cab services, and it's tough because it supported a lot of people. There are probably millions and millions of taxi drivers in the world, and it also, and so that's gone. What are they going to do? They're going to need to change jobs. They're going to need to change professions. Perhaps it's something big that existed is gone, but that's not something new because of technology or because of this particular technology. That's what's always happened.
Right. That's what always happened.
We just have to adjust now.
And I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Like we just we are living through a particularly fertile period for that happening again. Like for a good chunk of time, like generations worth of time, the changes in technology and communication and industrial services and things like that were very incremental. And we've hit a period now where we're starting to see these, it's in an inflection point where big shifts have happened, and people are going, what this? No, we have to roll it back. And it's like, no, you're just seeing an industrial revolution. Like if you go back and you look at the stuff that started happening when the cotton gin took over for people physically having to separate cotton from plants, everyone had the exact same reaction. Like all these people, the jobs and the shit and the slaves and the whatever. Like imagine
the big guy in the tribe who then saw his neighbor invent the spear. He's like, well, shit, you're not going to buy my pelts anymore? I've been out there killing these woolly mammoths for you for 10 years, and you're going to give everyone in the village a spear now? Fuck you, man. I'm going to beat you up and burn your hut down, right? Like it's classic story. It's on the
So what I
cave
think is
paintings and
interesting,
walls.
if you look at the shift from Kickstarter to Uber to like where we are with Patreon and stuff, is there's a difference in what the market is going to be and what it's going to look like for like the side of Kickstarter that I deal with a lot and Indiegogo and stuff is usually about stuff, right? Like to get a product, a physical product in front of you, just there's materials, there's shipping costs, like there's a floor at what that thing can cost without it not being worthwhile to do at all, right? Services, and so I mean Uber falls in between because you do have to maintain your car, like there's this physical component, but the fact of why Uber works, and this gets us into Patreon and podcasting and the idea of like lawyers and doctors and what the worth of all of that different stuff is when you're talking about essentially a service that facilitates or not a service, but when you're talking about a business or a communication medium, an app, like whatever, a web portal that facilitates just like the people providing a service, then you start to have this thing where it's like, well, all Uber drivers are doing is driving. And driving is a thing that in the United States is easy enough and ubiquitous enough that you can get a license to do it when you're 16 and never have to even take a test again to continue to do it until you die. Like that license is, oh, you were good at this when you were 16? Cool. You can do it for 70 years and we won't even ask if you're good at it again. Like, you know, so the idea of like what a taxi driver had, like maybe there's an X factor of they know their way around town because they're a professional driver.
That was a big part of it.
But like
that's been replaced too.
But that's also gone because of smartphones and GPS and computers that are better at navigating people than people. And so it came down to, can you operate a car? And in a world where I can operate a car, you can operate a car, I just would rather someone else did it for me in this instance. That would rather turns out to not be worth what taxi cabs thought. And so they lost out in this market, right? And so you're just going to start, I think you just are going to start seeing this diffuse to more and more and more places. And so that gets me to, I think, what the novel sort of model of Patreon versus Kickstarter is, right? Because Kickstarter is about like, here's this project, and give me some money and I can complete it. And then we all go, yay, we're done. And the difference with Patreon is this, you know, the name even comes from this idea of a patron, which is sort of an old model for how artists used to, like Shakespeare used to have patrons, and they were just rich people that paid him on an ongoing basis to stay alive so he could keep making poetry. And it was like an arrangement that wasn't about like commissioning a piece, although that certainly happened as well. It was more about like
expectation.
Right. It was more about I'll help you survive, right? So talk a little about the like sort of the idea of the model with Patreon, right? Like what are we want to keep doing this podcast as long as we possibly can.
So what I see with Patreon that's neat is I see it as potentially the beginning of the next the beginning of how media reaches mass market, essentially. Whether or not mass market still needs to be a thing someday, but why wouldn't say what's the singing show that people like?
The Voice or American Idol?
American Idol. Say American Idol started as a YouTube channel, right? And someone was doing American Idol with their friends around their house. Say it started as a video that you posted one night of like a karaoke event, right? And that was a popular video. It got 1 million views. And you're like, hey, I'm going to do this more often. You post more videos. Then all of a sudden you get a following. Then you put a Patreon page and you say, hey, I'm going to make these. I'm going to get people from my neighborhood who have really good voices. I'm going to get kids. Maybe you focus it. Hey, I'm going to get kids now, and I'm going to start to make them popular on the internet. And then they're going to get jobs as musicians, or my channel is going to grow. And eventually it's the community deciding from the absolute beginning all the way up to whatever level they want something to become. They decide, they support it, they finance it. And in our society, financing is kind of everything. You know, there's support, but in reality, stuff doesn't happen without there being financing behind. It's dollars driving things and allowing people to invest their time. And so Patreon is potentially a paradigm shift in how artistic projects come to bear.
Right. Projects that are less about like, when this finishes, I will ship you the smartwatch that you paid for. It's more about like, you believe in the mission behind this ongoing education project that I want to keep up, or this ongoing, like, we back a bunch of like education channels, science channels,
a bunch of channels we reference a lot on here. Like Smarter Every Day is on here.
We're pitching them some money. I think his
Found
My
channel
Fitness, which is one about like nutrition and stuff. Like, there's a lot of channels that make a bunch of money. Like, there's one that I think is making 20 grand a month now, that it's Kurzgesagt is what it's called. It's German for in a nutshell. The dude, I say dude because it started as a dude. It's a full-on team now. It's a side project for a design agency in Berlin. And they just make science explainer videos. And what I guess, what makes me so super stoked about that piece is you're starting to see like decent money thrown at educational projects, which is the community saying, we want to know more. Education is important. And in a world where we don't pay teachers what they should get paid, it fires me up that there are videos where this guy is making, a living's worth of money to just be a teacher through this platform where people have just said that's a valuable thing, and they're giving you money for it, instead of this thing where it's always like, we need to fight for the teachers. Meanwhile, no one wants to pay the teachers. And what I thought, what I thought, where to go from that, right, is this sort of idea of the micro transaction, which is what you're talking about with Patreon is more like this idea of, I have some money, and on a monthly basis, like Zengineering as an entity has a budget, and out of that budget, we use a tiny bit of it to go different places to cast our vote for the continued persistence of these projects over here. And the idea is, as long as they keep being good, we'll keep that flow of money going, and they'll continue to be supported. And when you talk about that in sort of, when you start to get way out there in terms of people that, theorists and, economists and stuff that are talking about all of this, like, oh shit, what just happened? Like market economy stuff that you were talking about before, they get into talking about microtransactions, right? So you can think of your $1 an episode that you give us on Patreon as this like microtransaction where you're casting a vote for our product continuing to exist. And there's an interesting aspect to that, because if you can vote with your money right from the outset, then we don't need ads to make money, which is the traditional model, right?
Which is a middleman service.
Right, it's a middleman service.
And well, where this goes, that's really interesting for me, and I don't know if this is necessarily the correct economic theory, or if this is actually where things will go, but imagine a world where your smartphone knows what you're doing at all times, and it gives money as you use things. And so I go to work in the morning and I use the expressway, so it gives 50 cents to the expressway fund. I take my trash out, it gives 25 cents to the garbage collection fund. I use electricity, it monitors that, it pays my electricity bill. Instead of having these things that are kind of like supported by like a centralized facility, like instead of a government where we're like, well, I don't want to support this local school, or I don't want to support that road, or I don't want to support that train. We make it so that people actually put their money where their mouth is. If you use something, you're going to pay for it. If you don't use it, you don't pay for it. And maybe some things can't be built then. And obviously this economic model doesn't work with everything, but
I was going to say that's tricky, because like with municipal projects, like nobody thinks they need roads until they don't have roads. And then they go, why don't we have roads? And everyone has to go, let me explain to you how taxes work.
Of course, it's wildly complicated, but conceptually, this is sort of where things can go. We actually get to vote with our dollars now, in a real meaningful way, and whether I mean politically or not, but in this sense with these platforms.
Well, and so what part of what gets me super fired up here, and this is where I don't want to go off the deep end into talking about cryptocurrencies and all that kind of stuff. But if you imagine digital money, where like one of the problems with cash is that the smallest unit of American money that I can transfer to you is a penny. And it would
don't
cost
accept pennies.
And I can't give you a penny. Like, I can't give you that 1 cent physically. It might be worthwhile for me to transfer you pennies if we're there in person, right? Just here's a nickel in your hat for playing music on the street, right?
Right.
Like, but for me to try to send you that dollar or that penny in San Diego for me in LA is not worth it. It would cost gas.
Right.
It would cost, like whatever. And it's kind of the same way with digital. The digital representation of that currency, even if I wanted to transfer you money through my bank, they have to run it through a bunch of intermediaries that ends up meaning that only 30% of that penny gets to you. But when you're talking about things like cryptocurrencies and digital currency, like without going into how it all works, I can conceivably, if the whole system is just digital, but treated like cash, which is essentially how something like Bitcoin works without going into how the complexities, like I could conceivably transfer you a millionth of a cent for every single time that I'm just like, I had a good thought about Brian, and I click a thing on my phone, and then you get your millionth of a cent, right? And if those add up over time, then you can have your feel good fund for every time you made somebody happy, right?
So we've got a great example for this on our list of topics for this episode. There's a new web browser launched by the former CEO of Mozilla called Brave. And what it is exactly that. It ties microtransactions into your web browsing. And so now
as you advertising before.
Yeah, as you visit websites now, they basically remove the ads from websites, whether or not you like that model or not.
Well, because let's talk about what so ads is just, they're running ads so that they can make money because you're coming there to read their article. And so your eyeballs, and because your eyeballs are coming to their site, they can go to Gillette and say, hey, we got a bunch of eyeballs. Do you want to sell razors?
Same way media has always worked since the printing press.
So they run ads. So then Gillette pays them to run ads for their eyeballs. And that blog doesn't care. Like, they just want to continue to exist and to write about things that are going on in the world. But they need to have Gillette pay them for our eyeballs so that they can keep doing what they're doing.
Right. So they can pay their bills.
They don't need to run ads if we could just pay them directly.
Right. Which people do sometimes. For instance, I try to donate to Wikipedia every year. I give like $20. Wikipedia is a total nonprofit. They don't run ads because they believe that potentially could twist their mission to share information. And this browser now lets you do that across the web. You can allocate, I believe this is how it works. I installed it this morning. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but you can allocate money to it, or you can choose to have them run ads for you, and you kind of choose the products you want to promote or support, or you can choose the sites. It chooses the sites for you by how often you go there. If I use Wikipedia 50% of my time browsing the internet, 50% of the fund that I allocate will go to Wikipedia. 10% will go to the New York Times. 5% will go to Gmail. Really cool way to distribute this money. And it goes back to what you were just saying. We couldn't do that before. I couldn't transact a penny previously, but this actually is built on Bitcoin, I think, or on some sort of digital currency like that. And so I can transfer a fraction of a penny, a millionth of a cent. And when you're talking about 7 billion people in the world who are coming online, who can interact with these sites now, that's super, super meaningful. And it pushes us into the realm of where we started this podcast talking about Star Trek. It pushes us into this realm where everything's kind of just distributed as needed. People need or want or use Wikipedia because they desire to be there, and it's supported because of that. There's no other reason to support it. There's no other need to support it. It gets the funding it needs. It's able to grow organically to the size and to the structure that it needs to be to support the people coming there using it. And that's difficult. We're a long ways away from having that really emerge in the world, but it's so cool. It's so neat.
And I had that. So when I'm playing guitar with people, I have a running problem where I'm playing rhythm guitar and the lead guitar starts to play a solo, and I get so into how dope the solo is that I forget what I'm doing, and then I fuck up as a rhythm guitarist. Like, I just did that. I was listening to what you were saying. I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, okay, yeah.
I want a communicator pin.
What was I gonna say?
Bridged Carpelman.
No, but like the idea. What's interesting there, as someone who just finished law school, is where this filters down to the idea of different things that are services, right? Like, we pay lawyers a lot of money. We pay doctors a lot of money. We don't pay teachers a lot of money. And that doesn't always seem to match up with their value for the world and the value they should have. And some of that has to do with the accessibility of gaining a skill set. Some of it has to do with the value of the service that they provide. But like, what happened with Uber, I think you're going to start seeing happen in places that have otherwise been hallowed ground. Like, law school only takes 3 years. It's hard, but it's not as hard as med school, and arguably not as hard as just sort of learning to program for some people, right? For some degrees of complexity, right? And so you could argue about who has more knowledge of value crammed in their head after 10 years of going to law school, practicing law for 7 years, or being a database engineer for 10 years, right? But after 10 years of doing both, a lawyer gets paid $700 an hour, and a database engineer is still kind of capped out at, getting paid very nicely, hundreds an hour, but it's not up in that lawyer realm.
It's
So what do you do with those? Like, you're going to start to see these realms where some lawyers are not going to get paid what they think they're worth, and they're going to be real pissy about it.
Well, I think the thing, you started off this thought here with the concept of fairness, and there's people aren't necessarily paid what is fair or what we think they should be paid, and you use the example of a teacher and an attorney. And I think what's interesting there is people aren't necessarily, where I go with this, sort of like the grandiose, how should the world be? People should be paid for their time. And teachers get paid less, but they still go to their job every day. You're still sending your kid to school, and that teacher doesn't make as much as an attorney. Now, there's a reason in our society they make less, because of the economic model that our systems work on. Lawyers have positioned themselves in a space where they're needed by they're needed for high dollar things, big business transactions or big cases where they can win money. And so attorneys can charge more. They just can't. The market will pay them more. And teachers are kind of stuck in a position where they have to form unions to keep the benefits that they have now. And so where it would be nice to see this stuff go is where you actually have a clean supply and demand, where there's a workforce and they get paid actually what the market will bear. Because people use that excuse now, teachers are paid what the market will bear, but that's not true in that case. Maybe attorneys, maybe because they're kind of in a business realm, right? The market does kind of bear that, but there's all this other stuff in the way. And something like the microtransactions and Kickstarter and projects where it's the end source of funds, the consumer buying directly from the person, going directly to the service, you remove a lot of the nonsense that causes the other hurdles. And so we can finally get to a point where people are actually paid what is like their usage. You're being used by the
Well, and that's why it's relevant. Like, it's relevant to the conversation about what we were talking about with drugs, right? Because if you talk about a skill set that's hard to obtain, there's an upstart cost. But then once you have that skill set, all you're getting paid for is communication. And in that sense, it becomes no different than Uber, right? Like, you need to have a car, you need to learn to drive. But after that, all the taxi cabs companies had a stranglehold on was being the intermediate for a form of communication. Like, I went to law school. I haven't taken the bar, but if I did, then I would be licensed to practice law. And it costs a certain amount of money to make that happen and for me to get that skill set. But after that, all I'm doing is talking to you about your case. Maybe showing up in court and talking to a judge about your case, right? But I'm just communicating, right? And so it's like, it ends up being this thing of, if you try to think of it, like the market forces and sort of the economy around the whole thing gets weird, because it's not like Kickstarter where you're like, well, I gave you this money and then a watch showed up at my door. And so when you do try to think of it that way, it's like, well, there's great value to having a doctor's skill set keep you from dying. And there's great value to having a lawyer's skill set keep you from going to jail. I guess where it all goes for me is that same thing of like, strap in for the Napster-like correction of all kinds of markets. Because I just went to law school, and I can tell you, a lawyer's time is probably not worth that much more than a certain level of programmer or a certain level of personal trainer or a certain level. Like, you have to learn how to use the system, and that is a system that's very important to know how to use so that you don't go to jail or so you don't screw up contracts or so you don't hurt people with divorces. But like, it only takes 3 years to get, and it's not hard enough that thousands of people aren't popping out with new law degrees every year. Like, you're just not, there's going to be a point where you can't make the argument that it's so much more valuable than a personal trainer or a dentist to the general public. So like, part of this is that communication thing we talked about before. As people talk to one another and go, here's what my lawyer did for me, and you both agree that was overpriced, then like immediately that's already going to start to get around. It's like companies are popping up that'll process your divorce way cheap because it's already general sentiment that, God damn, those are expensive. Like,
no one's ever talked about using a lawyer without uttering those words at some point before the lawyer's hired. Well, there's if we extrapolate this a little bit further, there was a movie that came out 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. I don't remember. But one of the concepts of the movie is everyone had this thing strapped to their arm, I think, that had the amount of time they had left to live on it. And what the society had done is they had turned your time to live into your currency. And so they essentially had removed, I don't remember if this is the exact plot, but the concept was...
This is a Justin Timberlake movie?
Yeah, I think it was Justin Timberlake, who I love, by the way. JT is a big fan. I know he listens to the podcast all the time. And so the... is that legal to say? Am I?
It doesn't. You're fine.
Because once he is, he'll be like, I am now. So that's cool. So they had turned your time into currency. They had turned your life into currency, which is really the only currency in the universe. If you really want to talk about it in a philosophical sense, I choose what to spend my time on, and that's the only thing I have. Right. And so if we created a situation where I could trade say I have 10 years of life left, I could trade that for services to other people. If I really need an attorney, I can give him 10 days of my life. Then you would see things really start to balance out. There might be, what you discover is there might be attorneys that live forever or doctors who live forever, probably teachers who live forever, right? People you'd be willing to trade for services that are of extreme value. But that's where we're trying to get with microtransactions and platforms like this. I think they're kind of naturally driving themselves towards actually identifying the content, the services, the products that are of real value and real desire, as opposed to things where the business was set up really well and the marketing was crafty and the person selling them was a really good salesperson. I don't mean to diminish those skill sets or those accomplishments, but those don't really service the end need of needing something, needing medical treatment, or needing a clean bottle of water, or even needing a smartwatch, right? You don't need a smartwatch, but we're eliminating things that aren't good, things that aren't needed, and we're sort of organically selecting for stuff that's good.
And I think that mentality, combined with what we frequently talk about, which was by far the theme of season 1.
Hippy dippy liberal nonsense
to get out of here. Not even just hippy dippy liberal, but it's like the fact is that technology, which is a force, like technology that wants more technology, is what's driving this forward. If you resign to the fact that we can't roll back those changes, then you can prepare yourself for what I keep saying, which is like strap in. Because you're going to see these changes where lawyers at large are like the entrenched lawyers are going to be in 5 years going, oh shit, what just happened? Like, and that kicks back at all kinds of other things, because like the student debt problem that we're having is a reflection of that, because it used to be that just by racking up a bunch of education, you could get a certain job, and the value of paying for that education was based on a certain system. And so now, you pay $100,000 to finish your education up through law school, because the idea is, well, I'll be a lawyer, I'll pay it off. But in a world where it's like, actually, we decided you're not worth that much, now you have all this debt and a skill set that's not actually so valuable. Like, there's all these messy market corrections that are starting to happen. And I think in a lot of spaces, that's only going to get worse. So it's a thing to know and to talk about and to look at, like, in the context of, do I go to law school, or do I learn to program, or do I just pick up a trade because maybe fixing your plumbing is of no greater worth than keeping you healthy at the gym, or keeping your teeth from falling out, or like, all of them take human time. And if you're breaking it down to time, like, part of the reason that divorces take a long time is because there's a lot of man hours that go into the back and forth arguments and all that kind of stuff. Like, so they are man hours, but like, does it need to be a $1,400 an hour? Probably not.
No, it doesn't.
And that,
I'll say it.
Right. And so that in the world where this stuff is pushing ahead and we can't necessarily stop it, we're back to that Napster of everything conversation, which is the Napster of lawyers is going to pop up, and then everybody's going to go, oh, fuck, what just happened? And there's going to be a whole lot of grumpy people with not as much money as they think and a lot of debt going, brr, 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 people should get paid more. And like, and my answer is going to be the same thing that it always is, which is, you should have listened to our podcast 4 years ago.
Well, the space where this goes, and this is where I was hoping we would end up, is the concept of redistribution of wealth. And in all those scenarios, you were kind of speaking from the perspective of the person who's losing their job, or whose job is being valued less than it has been traditionally.
Well, and they tend to be the loudest when these changes happen, right?
And partly because of the way the system works, they have the economic ability to be the loudest. And so what you're going to see is, don't want to get into finances because I'm certainly not an expert, but money doesn't exactly, it kind of does, but it doesn't exactly just disappear, right? So if attorneys aren't making $1,400 an hour, that money will be spent somewhere else. And it will ultimately, I hope, in a beautiful Star Trek-esque world, be distributed so everyone gets paid the exact same amount per hour that they work.
And everyone gets a jetpack.
That may never be attainable. Whole countries have tried to do that in the past, and it hasn't worked. Capitalism has proven itself to be extremely effective in the reality that we live in, which is great, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at these conceptual things that we could implement. Socialism, I think, represents that, right? Pay people for what they do, pay people for their time. We should look at those and see how we can strive for things that actually do seem like the right choice, right? We're not going to eliminate capitalism right now. We're not going to eliminate wealth. I don't think that's even interesting. We don't want everyone to be the same, but there is something to strive for, something of interest there. And we're seeing these technologies make that possible and make those changes.
Well, and so like you say strive for, I think it's just accept. Like, it really seems like there's a certain degree of entropy that's like, okay, capitalism is the correction in one direction away from communism and socialism, which we tried in certain places and it didn't work so well. But the swing back that direction, like the failure of the Soviet Union doesn't mean that some of their philosophical, principles weren't they were certainly worthwhile enough that a giant group of people decided to give it a go as a government. Like, so it doesn't mean that it's wrong, even though we still sort of have this thing of like, socialism, that's a bad word. It's like, okay, well, but maybe there are aspects of this that are worthwhile, and not just worthwhile, but like, to behave that way is natural. It's universal.
We should do an episode on this because you brought this up before.
We tried to push away from it for a while, and another force, technology, swooped in and went, sorry, bros.
Well, software, if you follow the thought of software is eating the world. I think the idea that software is coming into play with every single thing in existence. Uber, for instance, is able to replace the cab companies because of software, because of geo positioning, because of maps, Google Maps, because of the ability to communicate really quickly. Software, this very, very mathematical based thing, is starting to allow the second law of thermodynamics to come into play with big abstract global philosophies. And so our economic model now is seeing this increase in entropy, this distribution of wealth. It's happening organically because it's the way of the universe. Physics at a very low level is now starting to be visibly apparent in these things that we've always thought were these man-made constructs that are these wildly abstract, complex things. They're not. They're emergent properties of the universe based on these very low fundamental laws. And everyone making the same amount per hour is a fundamental fucking law of the universe. Do
with
it.
The assumption
and
that
if you don't want to do it, it's going to happen anyway.
Time is linear. I feel like that's a pretty good place to get out of here. So go support us on Patreon because
check out. Thanks for listening through this whole thing.
Years, you want to be able to say, "I did that before it was cool." Because I think something like Patreon is just the future of how everything works.
I think they're all
cool. Politicians to legal services to whatever. It's just going to be.
I think it's really. I get a really cool buzz out of being part of these projects. It's fun seeing emails from products as they're developed. It's fun hearing from the entrepreneurs as they work. And a topic we didn't get to touch on that I just want to mention real quick is this concept of Kickstarter for products where you actually pay to get the product. It's been expanded. The SEC just this year approved microfinancing.
Right.
And so you can go to some websites, a couple we had listed here. WeFunder is, I think, the biggest one, wefunder.com. And it's where you can actually invest. You get equity in the business. This used to be reserved for people who had a net worth much, much greater than the average person. And so now the average person can invest in businesses, get equity, grow their own wealth by supporting businesses as they grow. And it's just a further distribution, further example of this happening everywhere.
Well said.
Super fucking excited.
Yeah, I mean, I get the same sort of buzz. It's like I backed at a very low level Oculus when they were on Kickstarter, and now they're blowing up as a VR platform. Peak Designs is another example where I backed an early project on Kickstarter, and like I get a little satisfaction out of the idea that I supported their initial project, and now they've gone on to be this $1 billion company that I'm like applying for jobs to work for. And in my cover letter, I'm like, "Hey guys, I backed you on Kickstarter," like, and they don't care. But it's still, it's one of those things that like it makes me happy to feel like be able to say, "Oh yeah, I got in on those guys before it was cool."
Totally. Your brain is getting to contribute a little bit more broadly in the universe, and it's pleased by that. It's cool. This stuff is all really cool. I think we barely even scratched the surface on this. This is a much broader topic than I thought it was going to be.
Totally.
We could do very specifics from this, but hopefully that's what season 2 will be.
Yeah, stuff like that. Season 2, we're gonna try to get some more guests.
Way more guests.
Way more guests, so we can start these conversations from different places. I feel like we kind of end up in the same place. The least we can do is try to start in different places.
It's a good place to end, though. It's nice there.
It is. I always feel good with it.
Warm.
So thanks for sticking around for another one.
Thanks for hanging out.
Check us out at zengineeringpodcast.com.
Fuck yeah.
And, everything else you need is there. Or on socials, or just.
And if you've been here for 22 episodes, you're awesome. Right. And thank you for being part of this, because it's really been motivational. And I don't know if I would do 22 episodes if I didn't have a bunch of friends that are listening to this all the time. Yeah. I think I would have backed out a while ago.
Right.
So it's fucking awesome.
Thanks, peeps.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm Adam.
I'm Brian. Peace out. And don't forget to keep redistributing that wealth.
Redistribute that wealth.
I could look up the sound of kazoo on the internet and play it in the microphone.